So the number one thing, if you're working with real drums, that you need to do first, before you do anything, before you edit anything, before you EQ anything, don't pan anything, just make sure your drums are perfectly in phase. And this is something that it's crazy how many engineers, I think they kind of skip over. It's a very basic concept, but it wasn't always easy to like perfectly attain. Back in the day, you'd be in the studio, you'd be putting up microphones in different places, and you'd have the measuring tape out, right? And you'd go from the snare and the kick, and then this overhead is equidistant to this overhead over here. And you just have obviously we have all these mics up when we're recording drums. And the problem is, if for those who don't understand the inherent problem with multi-miking drums and having them sound good, is that when you hit the snare drum and you have a mic that's this far away, let's say your close mic, right? And then you've got an overhead microphone, and then all the way over there, right, you've got room microphones. Sound, comparatively to light, is very, very slow, right? It seems fast, but it's really not. And so the sound hits those microphones later. And ultimately, when you're getting your drums in phase, all you're trying to do is make the waveforms line up so that when you hit the snare, all the microphones are moving in parallel at the same time. And it sounds simple enough, but it's actually been kind of a pain to do. Before, when we were working on consoles in the analog days, you couldn't see the waveforms. So we just had to use our ears, and there was tools to adjust and best practices and best techniques. But most people just hit the phase button on the console, on their mic preamp, or, in their software or whatever it was. They hit the phase button. They say one is better than the other, right? And they would say, cool, it's in phase now. Chances are it probably wasn't perfectly in phase. Chances are it was more in phase. It was less wrong. But when you have drums that are like in phase, like perfectly in phase, you get all of the frequencies that the microphones capture, and you can actually mix with those. And so often when a kit is not perfectly in phase, people start adding EQs to make up for the lack of low end that out of phase drums have. So for a really long time, I did the phase button thing when I first started. Then a little program called Auto Align came out from Sound Radix, and I used that for years, and I had a workflow for that. And that was pretty cool, but it kind of took a minute. I would have drummers go into the studio, and I would say, okay, can you hit the snare drum, 30 times or something. Now the rack, if you've recorded with me, you probably remember doing this, right? And I would use that because it'd be really clean data. And I would then use Auto Align, and you would take one channel, that'd be the reference channel. I'd use overhead left, and you would then bring in all the other channels. You'd send that channel to all the other channels. And when you send that channel to all the other channels, they would reference it, and then Auto Align you'd slowly go through and comb through and get all the phase right. Well, Auto Align 2 came out, I think last year or something. I slept on it truthfully for a minute because I had my phase workflow, and then lo and behold, I was working on my new record, which I'm going to showcase here in a second. I was working on my new record, and I was like, let me just try this, why not? And so I grabbed the demo, and once I got the workflow, I was like, oh, I can now just have perfect phase in one click. I was completely sold. And I think a lot of people probably haven't heard the benefits of this. So I want to show you my workflow with Auto Align 2, what a difference it can make and how important it is. And it's really, really simple, but it's just such a fundamental thing that if you don't get this right, you're going to be banging your head against the wall, wondering why your drums don't sound as good as all your favorite records. And I guarantee this is likely part of the problem. Okay, so here we have the drums for a song called Misanthropic Holiday or Vacation. This is off the new Love Letter EP on Iodine Records. Let's play some drums so you can check them out. Now, I like this passage because it's not super washy and we can really hear what's going on. Here's my workflow. It is this simple. It's crazy. Okay, highlight your drums. I like the ARA workflow, which is to say, I don't have to listen to everything. It will just read the data and do what it needs to do. So you highlight your drums, you go up to extensions here, boom, Auto Align 2. This is going to pop up just like that in the bottom. Now, before you hit Align, I want to talk about the different sort of zones or areas of drums. And so let's do that real quick. So we've got, let me bring this down. Cool. We'll keep that up, but we're going to squash it and look at, so here we go. These are close mics, right? Kick, right? Snare top, snare bottom, rack, floor. These are just the names of the mic trees we used on the way in. Then I would call this sort of zone 2. This is overhead left, overhead right hats. These are further away, right? And then lastly, we have 2 different sets of room mics. This is a room mic that's kind of closer. And then these room mics were really far apart. All right, so to exemplify this, I've zoomed in on a snare here, and I'll make the waveform just a little bit bigger. So what do we see? What we see is, just like I said, the snare mic was closest. So it's out in front, right? What are these? These are overheads. These are behind. My hats mic was closer to the snare than my overhead mics were. And then if we go down here, what do we see here? Room mics close. That's even further away, right? But closer than my distant room mics, which are way back here. And so the distance the microphones are from the drums in relation to one another is actually going to affect how we use Auto Align 2. So this is just the one extra step that I think is really worth doing, particularly when, I'm going to really showcase this, because the biggest part of the impact, this is the first part of the hit, is just right here, right? On our snare drum. And we can see that here, we can see that here, we can see that here. And then obviously it falls behind here and here. I like my room mics being behind my close mics, as long as they're in phase with one another. I think things sound a little bit more 3-dimensional, but also this right here is not going to correlate to this as well because of all the reflections. I got a drum so we can exemplify this. All right, so think about it, right? You've got a snare mic, we'll say like right here, right? This is going to get a really pure sound from the top head. Not a lot of reflections, right? The microphone's really, really close. As we move out, let's say like this is like an overhead or something like that. It's a little further, but you know what I mean? As we move away from the drum, it's going to capture the direct sound of the snare. It's also going to capture more reflections. And then by the time we're across the live room, we're going to have a ton of reflections. So when we're looking at these waveforms, that's what we're seeing, right? We're seeing all of those reflections in the waveform. So that's just another general rule of thumb. As you get further away from the source of the sound, more reflections will be captured in the microphones that are further away. They will be less like the waveform of the close mics, and therefore they are less phase relevant. So the importance of them in terms of phase correlation to the close mics is less important, and they're also like way behind the initial transient. So I'm gonna treat them just a little bit differently. So hopefully all that made sense. So the way I'm going to treat these differently is basically what I'm going to do is I'm going to say kick in all the way through my overheads and my hats. These are all close enough to be phase correlated together. However, we're going to do my room mics separately. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to click and highlight, hold shift to click both, right click, new group on my close rooms. And then I'm going to do it one more time. And on my far rooms, I'm going to do the exact same thing, new group. And what you're going to see here is, or effectively what I'm doing is I'm saying, phase align all of this stuff all the way through in terms of distance through the overheads. Then I'm going to say, just phase align these together. Now, mind you, this is a stereo ribbon microphone. This is already perfectly in phase. I'll let it try, but I bet it doesn't do much. These, however, are a spaced pair of room mics, and you can just tell, right? Like the waveforms look different, more different, and you can tell they're not perfectly aligned just by looking at them versus the stereo ribbon, which is like basically perfect. And this one, less so. So we'll see what we come up with here. But after we've done this, after we've basically said close mics and overheads get their group, and then each independent set of room mics get their own group, all I have to do is click align. Auto Align 2 does all the heavy lifting. As you can see here, here's all the time adjustments. And like I mentioned with the close mic rooms, it's doing basically nothing. It's doing a little bit more on the far rooms. And then you can see we've got a lot of adjustments here on our individual microphones. Okay, so now for the moment of truth, right? All I had to do was highlight, click, turn the extension on, subgroup a little bit and hit one button. And let's hear the difference in the drums. When this thing is lit up, obviously it's on. And when it's off, it's off. So let's listen. That's crazy. That is so different. Let's just highlight a single snare and just really showcase this. This is aligned. This is unaligned. Do you hear all the low end that's missing? So nice. Much less nice. And then lastly, and this is part of my workflow, I will just highlight all the drums I just aligned. You can see this little icon here basically says that I have aligned everything. Highlight this stuff, I right click, go to extensions, and I just say make extension permanent. And it's just writing all of those adjustments into the file. This is nice because it just, once you approve it, it's over, it's done. You never have to think about phase on these drums again. So like I said, you could EQ for hours and you would never get such a nice, full, natural low end out of the snare as we just got by basically clicking one button, right? And so that's why phase just really is it's like the foundation of your house, right? And if you don't get the phase in your drums right, you're just building your entire mix on a faulty foundation. So whether it's via Auto Align 2, Auto Align 1, or just knowing how to correct phase manually, it's a must. It's an absolute must. So this is my new workflow. It's not the cheapest plugin in the world, but for me, if you work with Real Drums, I absolutely recommend it. This is not sponsored or endorsed. I don't know the Auto Align people or anything like that. But I do really love this product, and I just thought I would share.